I didn't change my layout here. Doesn't matter. But anyway, good morning, everyone. This morning we have the great pleasure of welcoming Mike Giovanesso as our guest presenter. Mike will be highlighting the features in Lightroom that reveal the potential in producing more creative and artistic images. Mike joined his first camera club over 40 years ago and was immediately encouraged after winning the photography awards in local and national competitions. After an early stint as a wedding, portrait, and events photographer, he decided to continue with photography as an avid hobbyist and has an artistic pursuit. Mike is a born mentor and a teacher for sure, and loves sharing his passion and experience with others. He supports several local camera clubs in various capacities and runs a huge Ottawa-based photo interest group that has grown to over 2,600 members under his leadership. He hosts a wide range of photography opportunities for local photographers of all skill levels, and I personally have enjoyed many of his presentations with the Ottawa Meetup group, and I've learned a great deal in doing that. So I'll now pass it on to Mike to reveal the Lightroom's true potential. Mike, over to you.
Thank you very much. So it's a pleasure to be here this morning. As Manfred said earlier, it's a little early in the morning for me. I'm not an early morning photographer, so it's kind of nice. But I saw some really good photos coming through there, and I'm thinking, wow, some good talent in the group. So I'm going to share my screen here, and just do that, and there we go, and it should come up. And it's me again, and I just highlighted myself. So the types of work that I usually do, everyone seeing my screen? And Ed, just nod?
Yeah, we got it.
All right. So this is the kind of work I usually do. It's a lot less nature and a lot more sort of people and that kind of stuff. I spend a lot of time with my photos planning what I'm going to shoot. I just don't walk out there and say, well, I wonder what I'm going to run into today. I mean, I do a lot of stuff to plan my shots and so on and so forth. And what I want you to do today is walk through Lightroom with a much more of a creative flair. The thing that you can do with Lightroom is very amazing. And what I find is about 95% of my photos, in fact, can stay in Lightroom. I don't end up going to Photoshop for a lot of my stuff, because Lightroom has become such a powerful tool for editing. Yes, it's a great tool for image management and keyword searching and all that kind of stuff and keeping track of your library. But I like to be able to go to a picture, and when I take the
Mike,
picture, yep.
Can you do me a favor? There's a little flyout at the bottom that says hide.
Yep.
Okay, great. It's out of the way then. Perfect. Thank you.
So if I take a picture, I usually have some sort of an idea in mind, and I'm trying to do something particular. So what I present is often what's in my head as opposed to what I took. And so here's a couple of examples of a photo that comes across looking like it took at a sunset. But if I hit the slash key, oops, and go over here and hit the slash key, no photo selected. That's not going to help. At the bottom of my screen, by the way, you can see every button I'm hitting. I'm hitting F6 and hit the letter E, and now I'm in loop mode. Go to develop mode and hit a slash here. And a slash is a flip to before. So there's the picture before and after my edits. So what I'm trying to do is I take each of these photos. I'll switch over here. You'll see sort of the before and after. Come on. So I'm sort of enriching the colors. I'm doing a little bit more, and those are kind of localized adjustments. But I also like to, global adjustments. But I also do a lot of localized adjustments, and that's where we're going to spend our time today. Is not looking at the overall picture and just turning around and saying, well, let's make it a little darker, a little lighter, a little of this, a little of that. But in fact, turn the picture more into your own vision and your own idea of what it is that you're trying to achieve. So you're going to see a lot of the sliders on the side, which you probably use anyways right now to do sort of making it darker, lighter, crisper, more contrast, etc. But we're going to do this on a much more localized basis. So this is the kind of just grab shot as I was in Costa Rica, and then this is kind of the more vivid shot that I did with a little bit of Lightroom editing. So here's some simple examples of things that I've been doing, and what I want you to do today is we're going to just walk through some of these sliders, and I don't mind questions and answers as I go along so that you can make sure you understand. So let's take this photo and let's just do a full reset on it. And there we go. So there's the original photo. We're heading off to breakfast. I got my camera out as usual. We were on vacation. I think this was Peru or Costa Rica. I don't remember. And of course my wife's going, it's breakfast time. You got all day to take pictures. You have to stop now. So I just happened to see some dappled light in a garden on our way to the restaurant, and I see this photo and I go click, and just I tuck it away. So obviously what interested me was the image of the light just hitting one flower, but the rest of it is just the way it is. So I can sit here and I can bring up the exposure and play with it a little bit, but I'm finding that it's not going everywhere I want it to do. It's overexposing some areas and bringing some others out. So the question becomes, what do I want to do? And the answer is, well, there's a little bit too much here, so I'm going to crop it to start with. So that's easy. Letter R for bring up the crop tool. And I'll just bring it down and get rid of some of this, extraneous stuff that's there, and maybe a little bit more of the black there. Give it a, good old rule of thirds. And there's my overall image. But a couple of these blossoms are a little bit too light. You can't address the whole picture as a whole because part of it's properly exposed. As a matter of fact, I could probably expose it a little bit better. Just bring up the shadows a little bit. Whoops, bring up the shadows a little bit. Give the whole thing a little bit more texture and clarity, and actually bringing up clarity happens to brighten some of these little flowers a little bit. So that's not too bad, but it's still not what I want. So what I'm going to be doing is using this little gear over here called the masking tool, and depending on what version of Lightroom you have, it's going to be it'd either be a series of tools along here, or the latest version of Lightroom has this gearbox where you can use the brush, the linear gradient, the radial gradient, color range, and luminosity range. They were all there before, but now they're all tucked in under these things as a separate submenus. So let's just start with brush. The brush is the easiest one to master. Whatever you paint is what you get. Now, you don't see what I painted. Well, if I hit the letter O, you can see where I painted. And show overlay, turn off overlay over here gives you exactly the same feel. And this color purple may not be what your color is. You can change it to whatever color you want. Okay, I just tend to use a color that doesn't appear very often in nature, doesn't appear very often in people. And so if I use a bright purple, then it's very easy for me to see. The other thing that will happen, oops, get rid of this. The other thing that will happen is if you paint with this color, what's happening right now is you're seeing the exposure go down because that was the way I left it before. So if you want, you can double click the word effect, and that just resets all of these sliders to 0. Now whatever I paint in purple is very easy to see, and whatever I paint with my mouse, I'm painting, but if I hit the Alt key, then I can subtract. And I can start subtracting away stuff that I don't want. If I want to, I can hit the right square bracket. I'm hitting the square bracket there. And now I can turn around. And it's not erasing fast because my flow is set to about 84%. Let me bring my flow all the way up. And now I can just erase much more easily. And all I'm trying to do is hit these flowers that are here. And as soon as I make an adjustment, the purple will go away and I'll see the actual adjustment. I can just bring up the adjustment, and that's not too bad. Now you can see that some little areas behind these flowers are turning on. I can hit the Alt key again, hit the square bracket, make it smaller, and I can just try to erase. And if you're trying to get erased really close to something, if you hit the Control key, nothing shows. All right. But what's happening is where the minus sign or plus sign is, that's the color it's taking, and it's using that color, the black in this case, as my control, and it's erasing all the way up to some sort of a border, and so I can just kind of keep it close to these flowers. And so now just to show you where I'm doing, this is still what's left. Oh, I can still erase over here if I want, and try to erase this stuff and try to get really, really close. Now, if you come from the Photoshop world, there's a tendency to want to get exact. I've discovered that you really don't need to be spending that much time getting really, really close to things, and you'll see why in a little bit. So here's my flowers. This is a little bit too prominent, and so I'm going to just bring them down again and maybe add a little bit more clarity, or maybe even soften these things, do the opposite. Bring up the highlights, and I'm just going to bring these things up. And this one's looking like it's pretty good, but the others are still a little bit dark. So what happens when one is different than the others? I painted all three of those with the same brush stroke, and so they're all getting amplified at the same amount, but the top one here had a little bit more sunlight than the others. I can actually create another mask, go to brush again, and paint over this one again. Of course, that darn black is there from leftover. I'll just pump this up, and now I can just control this one flower by itself. So if you want, you can paint flower 1, flower 2, flower 3, or you can paint them each together. The advantage of putting them together is, and I'll just name this mask, I'll just double click on this thing, and I'll call it, instead of mask 1, I'll call it 3 flowers. And I'll take the top one, and I'll just name that, lower 1 or something like that. Doesn't really matter what I name it. It's just so that I can identify it. So there's this one mask down here, and there's this mask for those 3, and there's my overall image, and again before and after, and you can kind of see that it's got the overall feel that I'm looking for. Is it the same as I'm going to take a snapshot of this? I'm going to Control N, and I'm going to call this, I don't know, test. Okay, now I have 2 snapshots. I have test, which is one I just did, and if I go back to done, oops. Okay, that's what I started with. So the crop's a little different, the toning's a little different. It's also, I've put a little bit more of a softer feel on the overall image. So the point of that is, most of you probably don't get to re-edit your image 3, 4, 5 times. I use these images when I'm teaching, and I go and I re-edit things on a regular basis. And it's amazing that I can never go back and recreate it exactly the way it was before. Why is that? Well, your mood, how you're feeling today, what you're seeing. It's an artistic thing. There is no perfect picture. It's whatever it means to you. So every time you edit it, it looks a little different. Very often, I'm not in a hurry to post things on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. It's not unusual for me to go in, edit something, leave it for a day, come back, look at it again, and see, do I still like it the way it is, or am I going to tweak it a little bit more, so on and so forth. So, but the point here is, there's a whole bunch of things that you can do on a very localized basis, as opposed to just looking at my overall sliders and playing with the overall contrast and bringing down sort of the, making it softer. I think I had a little bit more of a softer look on before. Maybe even add some overall haze to the picture. Now when I'm adding the haze, this guy's getting a little too bright, so maybe I'll turn around and I'll create another mask. And rather than trying to paint, I'll use something called radial gradient. Whoops, yeah, there it is. And I'll just draw an overall circle around something. And it's kind of like, if you look at this, the very center of the circle is what's the most intense, and whatever's happening on the outside is this white line on the outside is the extent. And I can actually bring an inner circle in, which says from here to here is pretty much full volume, and then from the inner circle to the outer circle diminishes to 0, and then everything outside is undone. So now I'll just go up here, and I'll just hit Effect, double click. So there's my color overlay. Again, the letter O brings it on and off. And if I want, I can just bring down the highlights here a little bit, and maybe make that particular flower crisp, even though the rest of it was given a little bit more of a softer edge. I'll make just the center of the flower crisp as opposed to the petals. And all I'm doing is I'm changing this to reflect my mood and what it is that I want to have. And then when I'm finished with this type of thing, I just right click in my world, export, and I want my signature bottom right, about 12% of the picture, And right now I'll just say use a unique name, and out comes my photo once it's exported with my and I have no idea which one it is in here. Let's go modify date. Oh, it was right there. And so here's my photo, and it's got my little signature down at the bottom, and I'm happy. Let's go back to Lightroom. All right, so let's try another one. Any questions on some of those things that I did on that one? Jump in.
Yeah, no questions up yet, Mike.
Sounds good. All right, so here's another image. Again, I might have been even the same garden or whatever. Again, a quick grab shot. Just I don't really have time. I don't have flash. Don't have a reflector. I just it's whatever I'm doing without disrupting sort of the my vacation party or my family. And so I see some flower in the sun. It catches my eye. I'll hit I'm in develop mode. I'll hit the slash key, and that's kind of what I saw. So the light obviously was hitting the flower, caught my attention. It's hitting the middle of the flower, it's not hitting the top, but there's a bunch of stuff on the top which is distracting into my eye. It's in the background. So I want this to have a different flavor. So I want to get a little closer to that. And even the top, now that I'm looking at it again, it's to me it's a little bit distracting. But let's just do a reset. Okay, so here's the actual image as I took it, and this is the raw. So, how do I want to tackle this? Well, some of the stuff at the back is a little distracting. So let's use some different tools to try to address this. So I'm going to take my linear gradient, and I'm just going to say, okay, starting from the top down around here, yeah, I want this to be a little bit darker. I want some of the highlights to come down, and voila. But I'm hitting this flower at the same time, because this is really dark at the top, all the way up to here's 100%, starts to fade all the way down to here, 0, and then from there down it's nothing. So the flower unfortunately is getting caught in all of this, so I want to get rid of some of that. Well, some neat tools you can use. You can say, hey, here's my linear gradient that I added, but I'm going to subtract something from that. So let's just subtract a circle from that, radial gradient, and I'm going to subtract that. Okay, so now you can see that the overall effect is affecting the leaves in the back and not affecting the flower as much. But you know what? That radial gradient, it's too much. So I'm going to get rid of that radial gradient, which is this portion. I'm just going to double click the 3 bars, and I'm going to say delete that. That wasn't what I wanted to do. Let's subtract instead a brush stroke. Now I'm going to subtract this, and now I can be much more precise, and I can actually bring it down a little bit, and I can just subtract out what I don't want out of that area. Okay, so now let's get rid of that, and whoops, get rid of that. So there's my image before. Can I see the effect before and after? Well, here's my mask, and I can just hit this little eyeball, and this is before and there's after. And I can adjust this, okay? I can say, well, give me a little bit of that background color, and maybe bump up the contrast a little bit over here. Where's my contrast? There it is. And I can do something like that. And of course I'm going to crop some of this and get rid of some of that crap anyways, and a little bit over here. And yeah, actually I like these leaves as leading lines. I'm going to come over here and just maybe do something along those lines. There we go. So this little thing's still distracting. I can actually darken that, or I can just clone the whole thing out. I just, again, square bracket, right bracket keys. I use those a whole lot. And I can, this is very obvious to the human eye. Repetitive things are inappropriate if they're very close. I'm just going to go grab some stuff over here. There you go. So I got a little bit of highlights on the side there. So that's pretty good. I still think the top needs a little bit more refining. Again, I'm going to bring up a mask. I'm going to create a new mask. I'm going to say I could paint it in. Yeah, let's just paint it in. Brush. I'm just going to paint in the top here. And by the way, if you want to reset all of these things, you can reset it each time. But the other thing you can do is you can say create a new mask, and I'll just linear, doesn't matter. And then before you paint anything, There you go. So now my set is default. Now I can turn around and I can do my gradient, and it'll be 0. I need to actually do something to make it happen. But I'm going to take this gradient, and that was just for explanation purposes. Well, hopefully I didn't delete mask 3. Get rid of that. Okay, so let's go back to this area that I painted, and I'm just going to bring it up, and it's okay, but it's getting the red, but at the same time it's also getting some of the green in the background. I could try to color all that in and try to fit it in it and finagle with it. But you know, there's another interesting thing I can do. I'm going to call this mask Flower Top. Okay, and it's right now it's this whole area that I painted in, but it's getting a little bit of the background. I'm going to try to eliminate all of it, but I can also take this flower top and I can say, okay, let's go over here and let's click on that, and I'm going to say intersect that with another mask. So the mask is primarily what I painted, which is this flower top, but I want to eliminate some of that other stuff, so I'm going to intersect this with a color range. And now I've got this little eyedropper, and I'm going to say only intersect this with this color red. Oops, there you go. What did I do? Flower top, brush, color range red. All right, so, and there you go. So I'm hitting the shift key now, and I'm just picking the color red, and I'm trying to pick the color red, but I'm having a hard time because I'm not clicking the right place. I'm just going to zoom in. I'm going to go over here, and instead of hitting the shift key and adding to a color, I'm actually going to just click once. I'm just going to click once on, there you go. I've selected red, and I've selected my brush stroke, and I'm going to bring it way down. So, all right. So now I would want to select Shift, click this, and get like that, and not too bad. So I'm getting more and more of what I want, and I'm still getting a little bit of the green. It's not really what I want. So some of that color is there's in that red, there's probably a little bit of yellow and a little bit of other stuff, and there's yellow in the back with the green as well. So it's collecting more and more things. So what I'm trying to do is just select an overall color. This isn't working well for me. I'm going to turn around and just say forget this. Just delete that whole flower top, and I'm going to start again. This time I'm going to say create, and let's start with the color range. And I'm going to try to zoom in here and say I want this color range. See, that color range, unfortunately, has got a lot of black in it. That's probably better. Let's go over here. So I'm still getting a lot of what I'm looking for. The color range is okay. All right, so I've got that. I still wanted to get rid of some of the stuff in the background. So now let's intersect the color range with just the brush. So let's intersect with, and I'm going to intersect with just a brush. Now anything I brush gets, if it's got color red and I'm brushing it, then I'm getting what I want. And so I'm getting a lot more of what I'm looking for at this point in time. And I'll just go back Z to zoom back out. Now if I turn around and I add a little bit of exposure to this thing, that's not too bad. I'm getting much closer to what I'm looking for. I'm much happier with that. And just add a little bit of clarity to that, maybe add a little bit of saturation to that. And that's not bad. I'm a lot happier with that. So here's my before and after. So this is still distracting at the top here. I'm going to get rid of some of that. So again, I can clone it out, or I can just go ahead and create a new mask. And I do a lot of this, a little sort of radiant, and I just say that's a little bit hot there, and just bring that down. And this is a little bit bright over here on this side, create another new mask. And so I'm not afraid to create a bunch of masks, and I'll just do all of that and reduce some of the highlights on this side. There we go, it's still there. Maybe give it a little bit of a punch with some clarity. and that's fine. The clarity was good on the leaves, but it hit this little area that I didn't like up here. So I'm just going to subtract brush, and I'm going to subtract some of that stuff away from there. So that if you look at the letter O, oh, did I do that right? Let the letter O, yeah, that's right. So this is my linear gradient is this thing over here, and this brush is subtracting some of that away. So I'll hit the letter O again. So again, I'm just targeting the areas that I want, and so if I say Control N and I say, you know, test, so that's my current version, and this is where I started with. Hit the done. Okay, oh yeah, and the done one had all of that bright stuff in the background, and today I decided I didn't want that bright stuff in the background, so I created this one. So you can actually go ahead and move that kind of stuff. This snapshot feature I like a whole lot. Control N lets me just take snapshots of different things, and I can try this a whole bunch of different ways, right? I mean, here's the original done, here's my test. I can turn around and try a bunch of presets and whatever, you know, try different things and say, you know, which ones do I like, and, you know, black and whites or desaturation. I've got a whole bunch of these things that I've accumulated over time, probably way too many. And so you turn around, you experiment on some of this type of stuff, and a lot of stuff here. Oh, that's interesting, weird. So okay, here's kind of a weird one. And then again, Control N. What was that? Grandma's Lemonade. And so, you know, you gotta learn to spell grandma, yeah, lemonade. And so I now have a whole bunch of go back to the top, minimize my presets. So I have the done version, I have the lemonade version, and I have the test version. Okay, so you can create a number of different ones for different purposes. Sometimes I have different crops. You know, if the customer wants a 5x7 and one's an 8x10 and so on and so forth, I may have different versions of snapshots. So a snapshot is kind of the same thing as a virtual copy. The difference is they're all in the same photo, and I have to export them one at a time if I create a virtual copy, and I'll just show you how to do that very quickly, although that's not our goal today. Create virtual copy. I now have two versions of the same picture, and I can go back to this guy and go to the lemonade one. So now I have this version and that version, and they both exist as if they were virtual. I'll hit the letter N, go into come on. Why is that not working? Library. There we go. So I have both of these photos, and I have the one with the filter, the one with the other one without. And the good thing of having virtual copies is when I go to say export, I can turn around and I can say, you know, export with my signature and so on and so forth, and I'll export two of them at the same time. So pros and cons, and I hit the letter L to just eliminate all the backgrounds and distractions. So you have a number of different options. So let's go over here and let's take another example, and here's my go back to develop module, the letter D, and let's hit reset. And okay, so this was sort of far away, picture, butterfly, etc. So I obviously cropped it a whole bunch. And again, cropping you can bring in from both sides, one side at a time. You just grab the handles if you want to distort it. If you want to grab the corners, you maintain the same ratios, although you can adjust it. But if you hit the Shift key, then you're maintaining the ratios. I don't usually worry about that because most of my stuff's online, unless I need to print something for a client, in which case, if I have to print something for a client, then it has to be a 5x7 or an 8x10 or something like that. But I just arbitrarily go to something I want. So there's some stuff at the top here I probably don't want. Get rid of some of that. I don't know how tight I made the original, but that doesn't matter. And I can rotate it a little bit more, about there somewhere. So that's about what I want. Hit the letter Z to make it fit to screen. So again, shadows I want to bring up, so that's just some global adjustments. But I was really looking at the shadows in the butterfly, right? I'm trying to bring up the overall shadows, and it's giving me what I want in the butterfly, but it's also opening up the shadows at the top here. So maybe I don't want to do it overall. So again, I'll just create a gradient, and I'll just say, this is the area where I really want the shadows to open up. And so you can just kind of, there we go. And again, you can intersect these with a lot of different things. As I'm bringing up the shadows, I'm bringing up the white stuff at the back as well. So again, I could try to erase all of that kind of stuff and say subtract and then working with my brush. But think of intersections. So here's a big circle, but I want to intersect it with just something dark. So take this circle and intersect with a luminance range. And just go grab the dark stuff over here. And now if you look at the letter O, I've just picked the circle and anything that's dark. So the light stuff that's at the top got eliminated from my selection. And even the white dots on the wings got eliminated. So now when I'm adding color, I'll just eliminate the overlay for a second. Now when I'm adding color, I'm really just focusing on the wings. Right? So you can do a whole lot with this masking if you think about how to best select it. And that's part of the magic. So let's just create another mask and linear gradient, and all this stuff over here is a little bit too dark, too bright rather, so I'm just going to darken that kind of stuff. And now this menu is for all my masks. I can close that and then go back to my basic menu, and let's just play with the overall clarity of the picture, and let's give the whole thing a little bit more warmth, and that's kind of giving me what I want. That's pretty good. A little bit of vibrance, a little bit of saturation. I'm finding this stuff down here very distracting. This leaf is not leading my eye towards the butterfly. It's going away. So what can I do with it? I can either clone it out or I can make it very dark. Let's just play with, since we're playing with masking right now, let's just take a brush and I'm just going to darken things a little bit, and I'm just going to just tone that down a little bit. So I mean, that's not too bad. It's still there, but I just toned it down. So I'm just going to take my brush and make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to lower my flow. So flow is how fast something is building up. So if I want to, I can just kind of just brush over this over and over and over again. And the first brush over is darkens it a little bit, and I'm just brushing in a little bit. And if you turn on the letter O, you can see where I'm brushing. Okay, I don't tend to work with the letter O a lot. You can see what I'm doing if I hit the letter O, but I just take the letter O off, and then I can see where I'm brushing, and it's pretty much haphazard. I'm just kind of just toning things down that I want to tone down. Now, if you're used to Photoshop and dodging and burning with Photoshop, some interesting things that I want you to recognize. I'm just going to start a new mask for the purposes of example. I'm going to say brush. I'm going to make the exposure very bright. And I'm just going to, do a letter Z here. Whoops. Let me do that again. Undo. And brush. I'm going to make sure that the flow is 100%. I'm actually going to go to a shortcut that I've created called white. White is nothing more than a shorthand notation for exposure, contrast, highlights. All of those things are set to 100%. So I'm just going to do this. Okay, so that's what I just painted with white. If I change my flow, and I'm still on the same brush, now I have to go over it and over it and over it and over it. And if I keep going over it again and again and again, eventually it'll go to the maximum density. Right now my density is set to 50%. If I bring the density up to 100%, I can kind of keep going over this until eventually it'll be 100%. Now, with Photoshop, if you paint over something enough, something, it keeps building. With Lightroom, if I bring the density down to 0 and I put a brush stroke through this stuff, let me paint, oops, got to be on this guy. Density, bring up the flow. I've brought that down to 0. If you paint with 0, you're going to get 0. If I paint with 50%, I'm going to get 50%. If I paint with 100%, I'm going to get 100%. And if I paint over it again with 0, I'm not adding 0 to 100. I'm reducing the 100 to 0. So you can add and remove, you know, till you're happy with something. Okay, and this is just my test. But I just wanted you to know how that brush worked so that you can, in fact, use it effectively. So let's go back and delete that mask. Let's go back to the, where's my other mask? Here it is. Okay, and then I can turn around and, again, a little bit of density, a little bit of flow, and I still have my exposure to a lower number, and I'm still painting in certain areas. Now, if I start to change this, that's a whole bunch. That's way too much. But I mean, all the areas that I had, and I can add a little bit of color, and you know, what happens if I add a whole bunch of orange or red to this thing? I mean, I can do a whole bunch of stuff, and I just, let's add a little bit more. That's way too much. Undo. And let's lower the density and the flow, and I'm just going to add a little bit more of that orange type stuff in here. And that's probably way too much in terms of color, but I'm just playing with sort of the art of the possible as we're going along and doing this kind of stuff. So some before and some after, right? So you can get, that's still way too much red in here. I can just reduce the overall amount of color and something along those lines. So take a new snapshot, Control, done. Control N, and just say test. And so there's my test shot. There's my original done, wherever it is. Come on, there we go. And I guess they're a little closer than the last two. And so there's some examples of taking a shot which was originally this one, very simple grab shot, and turning it into something that's a little bit more of a, you know, wasn't this butterfly wonderful? So how are we doing on time, folks? How much time have we got?
Plenty of time, Mike.
Plenty of time? So we got till noon, or?
You know, if you go another 15, 20 minutes, we're probably doing good.
15, 20. Okay, so we've done 3 images. We won't do 100.
Out of a dozen, I know.
That's fine. So, but I mean, we've covered the basics, right? I mean, think about it. We've used, so far we've used luminance range to gather just the darkness of the butterfly. We've used color range just to grab the red of the flower. We've used radial filter a whole lot, and I use that one quite a bit. Very often I don't bother brushing things in very specific areas, and linear gradient, and to be able to do constant lines. So and then we use brushes as well. We didn't do select sky or select subject. Let's try something along those lines. Let's go over here. So select subject is not something you're going to use a whole lot. I'll just hit a reset on this one. Okay, so select subject is fairly new as a technique. So if you just say select subject, Photoshop thinks about it a little bit and goes, I wonder what the subject is, and it found the lady, and because the last thing I did is I had this white set up here, so that's fine. So there's my subject. So that's great. Now, what is it that I want to do with this subject? She's about the same density as everything else. I don't want to make her brighter or darker. I probably want to affect everything but the subject. So I can turn around and I can say, okay, so here's my, show my mask. I'm going to take this mask and invert it. So there's a little invert button over on the bottom, the far right here. I can click on that, and that takes everything but the subject. Now I can take that and I'll just reset everything, and I can just start to lower the darkness a little bit, maybe add a little bit of warmth, and if I want this to be really, contrasty night type scene, I can do something along those lines. Now, it's starting to look a little bit more the way I want, and it's affected everything but the subject. But the subject's really now standing out, not particularly right. So I'm going to add some warmth to the overall image. So I'm going to go to my basic panel, and I'm going to add some overall warmth to the image as a whole. So now the model and the sun are giving me the overall color that I want. So I want the emphasis to be on her. So again, I'm going to create another mask. I'm going to, this one, give me a radial filter. And I'm going to go over here. I'm going to invert it. So the other way of inverting it is not just hitting that invert button over there, but you'll notice it says turn on invert, and there's a single quote as a reminder of what the shortcut is when I hover my mouse over it. So the single quote is right next to the carriage return. So I'll hit the single quote button, and so that's what's been highlighted. Again, the reason it's all white is because my defaults right now are all white. Okay, if I double click on effect, come on, then I can just do what I want, which is probably just a little bit of dark there, and let's straighten the horizon a little bit. We'll focus on her. That's fine. And so I can now add another little brush, create a brush, and I'm going to hit, I'm just going to turn all of it, I'm just going to hit, oops, I hit the letter P as opposed to hitting the square bracket. So that's not what I wanted to do at all. Control Z. Hello, Control Z. I think somewhere along the line, whatever letter I hit, I probably changed the rating on these things from 5 to a 4 or something like that. Anyways, so I'm back to where I wanted to be. I want to be in the develop module. That's good. Create new mask, brush, and what I'm trying to do is I want to brush some of the water, and I want to really make that almost sparkle, if you wish. And I'm trying to just, hit some of that. And what's happening here? My density is very, very low. I'm going to bring that way up because I was demonstrating density earlier. My flow is down. So again, I can just do this. Now that's obviously way too much, right? So I can just bring that down, add a little bit more warmth or whatever to that water. Hit the Alt key, start doing some erasing. And then it's hitting her as well, so I can try to also hit the Alt key again and try to erase it from her. Okay, but if it's hitting her and I'm trying to erase her and she's the subject, the other thing I could do is I could just say, hey, there's my mask, I'll call it water. And right now it's whatever I painted, but it's still hitting her. What happens if I say subtract subject? And it takes for a moment and refines the results. Now I can turn around and I can go back to my brush and I can paint away, but it's never hitting her. She's subtracted out of this picture. She's subtracted out of this equation. Okay. So the other interesting thing you can do with this brush, by the way, whoops, I had the Alt key turned on, is you can hit a point, hit the Shift key, and hit a dot somewhere down below, and it'll draw a straight line for you. So I'm going to hit the Alt key, start erasing a bunch of stuff. And I was trying to draw these straight lines, and it wasn't working out for me, so I'm saying, okay, what happens if I were to just turn around and say, draw a line from there to there. Oops, I didn't hit the Shift key. Silly me. Hit the Shift key. All right, so now you can turn around and do something that's got a little bit more of a click, shift, click, click, shift, click. All right, and so it's something along, that's probably a little bit way too much, but you're getting the idea of what I'm trying to do is just play with the way I can mask things. And if I want to play with the sky, I can just turn around and say select sky. Wait. And this is what it's selected as the sky. And it's picked up little areas in between the trees and so on and so forth. So it's done a pretty good job. So what do I want to do with that sky? I don't know. Let's just give the whole thing a little bit of clarity. You know, maybe a little bit more drama with the dehaze filter. Some saturation, a little more red. I mean, I'm just playing around here. She looks way out of place right now, so this is not where I want to be, but it gives you an idea of where we want to go. Go back to this mask, which was the vignetting, and you can darken the outside edges a little bit more. She's still way too bright compared to everything else. So let me close this, and I'm affecting the overall image here, and all right, a little bit of texture. That's not too bad. So I'm trying to make sure she doesn't look like she was painted in there or something along those lines. So once you've got a bunch of things on the side here, and you've got sort of exposure a little bit, contrast a little bit, highlight a little bit, and you're saying, you know, this is a little bit too much. I don't want this. Let's tone it down a bit. You can try to refine all of these, and it's a little bit of a pain to do that. But you can also, is this a good one to explain this? I think I didn't do it right. Where's auto? I'm looking for a slider, which I'm not seeing at the moment. Let me go back to here. Ah, yes, this is a slider I'm looking for. Okay, so I have right now it's just exposure that's turned on, but let's just turn on blacks a little bit more. Let's bump up clarity. Let's put dehaze on there. Okay, so here's a couple of sliders that are all set, and they're partially set for some value, but you're saying it's a little too much. I can click this little button here next to the effect, and all of that gets reduced to one slider called amount, and it's set at 50, so it's the medium amount. So I can bring the whole thing up, or I can bring the whole thing down. And what it's doing is it's multiplying the 50% or the medium by a certain amount. So if I bring it all the way up and I reopen this, it's pushed all of those sliders further off. I close it again and bring it all the way down, and it's brought all those sliders more towards the center point. So you can affect all of your sliders at the same time if you use this little flag to turn things off and on. So it's a handy little tool to use whenever you're in the mask mode. So there's selecting sky, selecting the subject. Now sometimes subject doesn't work out very, very well.
Yep.
Here's, go ahead.
I got a question from Bill Robertson. Are the sky and subject selections done locally, or is the image sent to Adobe for processing?
Everything is done locally. Yeah, so you don't need to wait for it's not like the neural filters in Photoshop, where some of those things are done in the cloud. Everything's done locally on your machine. And Photoshop, Adobe Camera Raw has all the stuff that I've talked about here is also in Photoshop if you want to go there. So here, if I try to say select subject, if I remember right, it didn't do as nice a job. Okay, so let's see what it picked. And it picked the bird. It's not too bad, but it also picked all these rocks. So it wasn't quite sure what the subject was. But again, that's not a big deal. I can just say subtract, get the brush out there, and just say, okay, well, this is stuff I really didn't want included. And now that I've just selected the bird, I can bump up the contrast on the bird or the clarity, and do a little bit of dehaze or something along those lines. Maybe give it a little bit more texture. Okay, now the overall picture is over bright in my mind, so I'm just going to go down to the basic sliders, and I'm just going to reduce the overall exposure. I'm going to bump up the contrast a little bit more, and so on and so forth. I'll get rid of this whoops, get rid of this, and let's see, a whole bunch of cropping here, because my longest lens, unlike you nature guys and birders, is a 200. So away we go. So something along those lines. And if I'm not crazy about the reflection, I can just go here. Anyway, something along those lines. So you can see that the overall subject selection does a really good with something like this. That's not an issue at all. But when you start getting into certain types of subjects, it has a harder time trying to figure out where your subject is.
Mike?
Yep.
Got another question?
Go for it.
Can the subject be exported to a different background? Is something from Jack Coots.
No, you can't. This is Lightroom. You can't export anything. I mean, you're working with selections in the same image. You can select a sky, for instance, but you can't substitute it with another sky, or you can't export the bird to another area. I mean, the best you could do. Let's use this bird as an example. Right now, my mask is the everything but the bird, right? Because if I hit the letter O, oh, sorry, it is the bird. My mistake. So right now the subject is the bird. So I'm going to actually and I can see this is not a good selection. It's still got rocks and flowers and everything else. But for the sake of answering the question, I'm going to duplicate this bird. Okay, and then I'm going to call this, all but. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to come on, I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to invert it. Okay, now the interesting thing is, remember I subtracted this stuff at the edge? And I inverted the bird, but now it's still subtracting this stuff. So I'm going to take the subtraction and I'm going to convert it. The brush, sorry. I'm going to take this brush and I'm going to say, rather than subtracting it, I'm going to convert it to an add. Okay, so now I have everything but the bird. I'm going to take everything there and I'm going to flip it to a black. And do something along those lines. It didn't do a really good job, so anyways, I'm going to have to play with it. But well, now that I have this thing that's all but black, I could take this and I could just grab a screenshot of it or export it and then go over to Photoshop and use blending modes to take this bird and put it into another image. If that made sense, great. If not, it's probably over some people's heads. But the concept of blending modes is you can punch out all the black very easily. So I could take this bird and add it to something else in Photoshop because the background's completely black.
I think that's good, Mike. Thanks. Okay. I was just going to add, I mean, the reason Lightroom and Photoshop ship together is both can be used and both have their strengths and their weaknesses. And cutting things out and putting things into layer and so on, that's where Photoshop shines.
Yeah, absolutely. This Lightroom still does not support layers, and as soon as it does, Photoshop becomes a very specialized tool for things like, warping and text manipulation and graphic arts and maybe doing things like what do I call it? Liquify, that kind of stuff. But anyways, so let's finish with this one. Do we still have time to do one more?
I think we're another 5 minutes maybe. We're getting into the hour now. So
okay.
We're
So
the end.
I'll just do a really fast. I'll hit a reset here. So this is my original image, and all I was trying to do is it was dark. These lights weren't on yet, but it was getting a little chilly. We didn't really want to be there a lot longer. So yeah, I can do a certain amount and try to brighten it and so on and so forth. But it was overall it was gray. It wasn't giving me what I wanted. So what I decided to do is make this into more of a night scene, sort of cool it off a little bit. She needed to be a little bit brighter, so I just added a quick radial filter, and I just kind of just came over here, and some of my shortcuts, brighten faces when I use a whole lot. It's just a little bit of brighten, a little bit of shadows bringing up, a little less texture because I'm usually using skins, stuff like that. So there's kind of like an overall image. And then I started to create, oops, wrong one, create a radial, and I just created sort of a little flower there, and then I just said I was going to add another radial, and then just add another one there, and then add another one here, and I just added a bunch of these things, and I'm probably not going to do a whole bunch of them here. And then I just made these, you know, warmer, a little bit brighter, and maybe give it a whole bunch of yellow or orange, that type of thing. Maybe arrange these a little bit better. And so I'm starting to get a little bit more of the flavor that I want. I can add a couple more of these things and then say, well, all of these things are going to cast an overall glow, so I'm going to create another filter and just kind of just do this. This whole thing is going to have a little bit of a glow type of effect. And a lot warmer, and so now the whole thing's starting to take on a little bit of a glow. I can subtract out the model again, subtract, select subject, and I don't know what it's going to find for a subject, but let's try it. Okay, so she's come out of that. So it actually took away a whole bunch from her, but now I'm realizing, you know, the glow should probably be on her as well. So I can turn around and remove this subject, sort of delete the subject one, so she's back again. But it's a little bit too much, so I'm going to add another gradient. Actually, I'm going to make the whole thing darker. And there we start to get into that. Let's go back to the mask of her and make her a little bit brighter. She has to be a little warmer and a little bit more of that effect over here. That's kind of nice. I'll add another linear gradient over here, because the further away you are from those lights, the darker it'll be. So I'm just going to start, you know, kind of eliminating the light from over here. There's still some stuff that has to happen with her, so I'm going to turn around and I'm going to say select subject again. And I'm going to try to make her a little bit brighter overall. Come on. Yeah, the legs are starting to come out okay, but the top is still a bit too much. So let's go back to this mask, which was the face, and let's tone that one down. So you got to remember how many masks you have, and labeling things help. So you can kind of just take mask 1 and call that face, and you can take mask 5 and call that body or whatever. So you can remember what all of these masks are. You get a little bit of an idea, but you're starting to get a little bit of an overall sort of concept. Now she's too bright and she should be darker on the opposite side, so I'm going to take her body and I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to call that body, and I'm going to call body darken. And the reason I want to do that is I'm going to intersect that with a brush. Intersect with a brush. And I'm going to just and anywhere I paint is going to get darker. So that's because I have the body and the brush intersected. So the two of them have to come together. And now I can turn around and make one side of her body really, really dark, or just a little darker. All I'm trying to do is make sure that as there we go, there, a little bit highlights, and I'm trying to get this to eventually match. The lights at the top are a little too bright, I have to adjust those and so on and so forth. But where I'm going is building this up a little at a time to give me the mood that I'm looking for. And so here's my done picture. Okay, when I was done, here's how I originally exported it. So the first time I did it, come on. And there's a lightly lit version of the same picture, and here's another redone, which I did at some point in time. Right, so there's so many ways to edit this photo, but the key is to be able to think in terms of local terms and not just think of the overall picture, bright and dark and so on and so forth, which are the traditional sliders, which you'll see in Lightroom and a lot of people use and get used to that. But today what I wanted to do is get you well beyond the overall picture brighten, overall picture darken, and really learn to work with selections and what Lightroom calls masking, so that you can highlight very specific areas of the picture and change the overall mood of the picture to something which is much more in light of what I was looking for. So no flash, background was obviously bright, model was silhouetted, and by selecting the model, selecting the sky, and doing some work, I can convert this feel to something that I think is a lot more conducive. So sort of a summer effect, turn it into an overall fall effect just by selecting the color green, selecting the model, selecting the model and inverting it. You can do a whole lot with your photos. So let's just turn it over to questions, if anybody has any.
There are no more questions, Mike, but Paula Brown says, excellent, Mike, thank you. And I think, for me, the one thing I think it's very clear is how this is a creative process. It's iterative. You don't necessarily have a pre-cooked answer. You play with it, and the playing with it is how you come up with a very strong image as an output.
Yep. Yeah, playing with it is part of the creative process. I remember sitting in a restaurant after one of the Camera Club meetings with everybody, and one person said very proudly, I never edit anything. Everything's done right in camera. And I go, if that's where you want your creativity to end, great. for me, that's only half the job.
Yeah, and I remember reading an article about the iconic Ansel Adams picture, Moonrise Fernandez, New Mexico. Over his life, he did 1,320 different versions of that.
Yep. If only
creativity never stops.
If only he had the snapshot feature in Lightroom, he would have saved some time.
I'd like to own one of those images.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Mike, thank you very, very much. That was a very illuminating presentation. I use Lightroom. I've used it as obviously the file management, but I've done the global stuff. But thank you for really explaining very well the more localized things. And I think that what it's done for me is it's encouraged me to spend more time